The 1988 film Mississippi Burning presents a heavily fictionalized account of the 1964 FBI investigation into the murders of civil rights activists James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner. While the film seems to want to drive home a powerful message about the nature of bigotry and the tensions of the civil rights era as a whole, it suffers from a particularly debilitating problem for which it has been severely criticized, even from the moment of its release, that being its lackluster portrayal of Black Americans. Rather than making a film where the Black residents of Jessup County, Mississippi, where the film is set, take an active role in their own liberation from oppression, director Alan Parker instead chose to treat them as silent background characters at best and completely helpless people in need of saving at worst. This video essay will briefly analyze a few examples of this phenomenon throughout the movie, along with the reactions of several prominent reviewers and activists who spoke out in the wake of the film's theatrical run. Do try and forgive the poor quality of some of the clips. The first instance of a Black character being downgraded to a role that is secondary to that of white characters happens in literally the first few minutes of the movie. Note that James Chaney, who was the only Black activist among the three who were murdered, has been relegated to the back seat of the station wagon in which they are driving. In actuality, Chaney was driving the car that night, as he was the only one who was local and knew his way around. Schwerner and Goodman, both from New York, did not know enough about the area to be behind the wheel while traveling from county to county, but instead of placing Chaney in the driver's seat, the film opts to place one of the white activists up front, thereby giving him the impetus for the subsequent actions the three undertake. He even suggests that they
sit tight and let him talk,
thereby taking charge over the situation. Chaney, by contrast, receives only one line in the entirety of the scene. There was absolutely no reason for Parker to make this alteration, and yet, here it is. That seen and not heard mentality makes up the brunt of the depictions of African Americans throughout the duration of the film. In fact, it wouldn't be unreasonable to say that there is not a single Black character in the entirety of the movie who advances the plot. Well, there are two, but we'll get to them later, and why their contributions don't really grant the film any goody points in due time. Because of the secondary role that Black people take on in the picture, many, including myself, believe that Mississippi Burning falls under the category of a white savior movie. At the beginning of the picture, the Black population of Jessup County is portrayed as helpless, a group of people who can't obtain their own equality and instead have to have it given to them. And this is where our protagonists come in, FBI agents Alan Ward and Rupert Anderson. Together, they strive to save the Black community of Jessup County and begin gallivanting around. But while they do things that are actually useful to the plot, like chasing down Klansmen, taunting the racist establishment, beating the piss out of a murderous deputy, and, romancing an informant, what happens to the Black people of Jessup County? They are beaten, subjected to firebombings, lynched, and castrated by members of the Ku Klux Klan. Make no mistake, these reprisal terrorist attacks absolutely happened, and were not uncommon in Mississippi during the Civil Rights era. But what also wasn't uncommon in Mississippi was the widespread engagement of Black activists in their fight for their rights. Many of them laid their lives down on the line, and, unfortunately, Mississippi Burning fails to adequately portray their participation. In fact, on the few occasions where Parker did opt to show protests undertaken by Jessup County's Black community, they oftentimes come across as nothing more than an excuse for the white protagonists of the story to feel guilty, like when one march convinces Mrs. Pell to spill the beans on her husband's Klan activities, or when a somber funeral procession for Chaney allows Ward to show off how not racist he is. Now, as I mentioned earlier, some defenders of the film might point to a pair of Black characters and insist that they drive the plot forward with their actions. The first is a young boy who witnesses a firebombing and agrees to identify the perpetrators under the condition that he wear a cardboard box to conceal his identity. This witness goes unnamed, but his testimony ends up solving nothing, as the three men responsible are released and the whole thing turns into another dead end for the FBI. This series of events, while interesting, do absolutely nothing to advance the plot. They could have left the whole sequence on the cutting room floor, and the film would have come to the exact same resolution. Dead ends for the FBI, flirting with informants, beating up racists, and convictions. The second Black character that defenders might point the finger at is actually one of the more memorable figures in the film, though he, too, goes unnamed. The FBI specialist, played by Baja Dola, is called in to interrogate the mayor, played by Arlie Ermey, after he's kidnapped by Anderson and Ward. Over the course of about 4 minutes, the specialist recounts the tale of a young Black man who was seized, beaten, and castrated with a razor blade by members of the KKK. All the while, he menacingly withdraws a razor blade of his own, and informs the mayor that unless he identifies the Klansmen responsible for the murders of the three activists, he will suffer the same fate as the boy in the story. As a result, the FBI gets the names of the murderers, and is eventually able to press charges. When Parker discussed this character in interviews, he said that he wanted the Specialist to be the personification of black vengeance. In his words, the Specialist represented the assertion of black anger and black rights reasserting themselves. And while the scene is undeniably powerful, and Parker may have been coming at it from a place of good intent, I still think it absolutely fails to make up for the lack of black representation for one simple reason. None of it is real. It never happened. There never was an FBI specialist brought in to torture a mayor with a razor blade, and if there had been, he probably wouldn't have been black. In fact, most sources I could find suggested that the FBI didn't have a single active black agent in 1964, which seems in line with the well-known racist attitude of the Bureau's top brass, like Director J. Edgar Hoover. And if Parker wanted to put in a scene depicting black anger and black vengeance, why not use the people of Jessup County themselves to drive that point home? Why let the FBI, a group notorious for attempting to stifle civil rights at every turn through things like COINTELPRO, be the ones who actually do the most? The truth of the matter is, Mississippi Burning absolutely fails to adequately depict the role black people played in the civil rights movement. Instead, it opts to let the drama between a bunch of white people be the deciding factor as to who wins out over Jessup County, and in doing so, it does a massive disservice to audience members who might not have previously known much about the civil rights era. As the NAACP said in its 1989 statement on the movie, blacks in the film are portrayed as cowed, submissive, and blank-faced. They are used as a backdrop, when in reality, they were the principals. This is a gross libel on the many black Mississippians who, even knowing they could be murdered with impunity and nothing would ever be done, still sought time and time again the right to vote. The NAACP was not the only one to voice these concerns. Their claims were echoed by people like Coretta Scott King, Spike Lee, Myrlie Evers Williams, and even the family members of Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman. At the end of the day, Mississippi Burning represents just one of a number of white savior films that relegate minority characters to the background. As audience members, it's important to call these films out when we see them, and to encourage filmmakers intending to make future historical films to ensure that they're telling the whole story, lest they end up doing more harm than good.